welcome to OverHERD at Career Education. My name is Denny, and I've got a really great and I think a really timely topic for you today, and this is, should you take an unpaid internship? Internships are something that my department pushes very heavily. It's something that I feel like I talk to students about quite regularly. There are different types of internships, and not all internships are created equally. So let's go ahead and jump into the discussion on that a little bit today. Now, most of us know that an internship is a great way to gain not just experience, but experience in a desired field. The old catch-22 that I think sometimes students fall into is, I cannot get a job because I can't get experience, and I can't get experience because I can't get a job. And that is quite a pickle to find yourself in. And an internship can be a really good way to try to break out of that cycle. So for this reason, among others, I think as a department and as a university, I think particularly some departments and academic colleges within the university, I think that we push internships fairly heavily. Like I said at the beginning, though, not all internships are created equally. Two key types of internships are paid and unpaid. Now, obviously, internship, well, getting paid sounds better than not getting paid. So why on earth would I consider an opportunity where I don't get paid? I do want to talk to you a little bit about that and about how an unpaid internship might not be as bad as it sounds on the surface, but there's definitely still going to be some considerations that you want to think about before jumping headfirst into one of those as well. So some controversies that have surrounded internships in the past, even paid internships for that matter, include being a gopher, meaning go for this, go for that, go to the mailbox, go make the coffee, etc. So internships and interns, I think in the past have sometimes gotten that rap that all I do in an internship is make coffee, get mail. I think some of the stuff that I had just mentioned, filing, maybe answering phones. And it's not that any of that stuff is in and of itself bad, but how much is that internship actually preparing me for the position that I'm seeking with the degree that I'm getting soon to complete. And again, that's not an issue that's necessarily only associated with an unpaid internship. There are paid interns who do nothing but probably get coffee and bagels, honestly. So when we think about the unpaid internship, that adds yet another layer of complexity to it. So a paid internship, you can kind of think of it like this. It's kind of like a summer job. It's more related to your field, maybe compared to fast food or putting clothing on a shelf at Macy's or whatever the case might be. But what about an unpaid internship? Is that something that's worth your time, and is it something you should even consider? So I want to talk to you about some pros and cons of the unpaid internship, starting with some pros. So the pros with an unpaid internship include, theoretically speaking, you still get that experience that we had talked about previously. One of the primary reasons that people look at internships to start with. Now, theoretically is a key word there. We're going to talk more about that later on. So theoretically speaking, you still get to list the experience on a resume, even if that does not translate into dollars in your bank account, meaning you still get that great experience. You can still put it on your resume, even if financially it wasn't necessarily beneficial for you. Again, theoretically, I'm being very theoretical today. Again, theoretically, you get to make connections that you wouldn't get to make otherwise. That can be huge, just getting your name out there and making connections. And that leads us into number 3, which you might still be in good shape to have an opportunity that prepares you for an offer of full-time employment. Now, not all internships, paid or unpaid, necessarily lead to employment, but the possibility definitely exists that it will. So some cons of unpaid internships include, obviously, the lack of money. Now, I don't know about you, but anytime you want me to do anything, I'd rather do it, for money than not for money. But for students, it can present a unique situation, and it can go a little bit deeper than just simply, am I being paid versus not being paid for this? An unpaid internship, it can take up hours of your time. It can take a big chunk out of your schedule. And these are hours that you might actually need to make ends meet. So not only are you working and not getting that money, it's not like you actually get hours added to your week either. It's actually taking you away from what could be a paid opportunity. It could be something that you need to do. So con number two, you might be in a situation where someone is using you for free labor, which is not legal, and it's not really the scope of an unpaid internship. And unpaid internships do have some stipulations put on them by the Department of Labor, and we're getting to that. So if that's of interest to you, then just hang out a little bit longer. We will cover that. But you don't want to be in a situation where someone's just simply using you for free labor. And not to say that's not a risk for a paid internship, but even if you're doing mind-numbingly boring tasks that do not necessarily relate to your degree, and a paid internship, at least you're being paid for it, whether they're enjoyable or not. And the third con is kind of if you want to think of it, kind of like almost like a double taxation. And you might be in a position where not only do you have to pay for the unpaid internship, you might actually have to pay for it twice. Now, what the heck do you mean by that? If you're getting an unpaid internship, typically one of those stipulations is that you're receiving college credit for it. Now, if you're on a scholarship, you're in great shape. If you're in a position where you're paying to go to school, you might be paying your university for that college credit that you're getting through an unpaid internship, so in a sense, you're actually paying to work for them versus getting paid to work for them. And the argument could be made, is you pay to go to class. It's a different way to teach you. That's probably a rabbit hole that's a little bit beyond the scope of what I'm going to go into today. But not only do you pay once, you might actually have to pay twice, because doing an internship, particularly if it takes you to a major city with high cost of living, you might have to think about rent. You might have to think about food. You might have to even think about parking. I mean, I don't know if you're listening to this, what your experience is going around the major city, but you can pay a lot of money just in parking every month. Forget everything else. Not to mention what do I wear to work? What if I need a wardrobe? So you can actually not only on course credit, but also just in the day-to-day logistics end up shelling out quite a bit of money for this experience. So let's talk about this. Unpaid internships, are they even legal? Now, the quick answer is yes, but like I said before, the Department of Labor actually puts restrictions on them, and this includes that they must provide you with training that would be similar, and that's a fun word, similar to an educational environment, albeit it's probably going to be more hands-on versus more book learning, but the idea is that it's a hands-on way to practice or to reinforce what you're learning in an educational environment. In other words, it's supposed to be set apart from just simply using someone for free labor. Unpaid internships, also number two, there should be either an integrated coursework or academic credit given to you in exchange for completing that. An internship, it should somehow check off a box for course requirements, either in addition to or perhaps even in exchange for some class credit. I've mentioned it on here previously. I was a graduate student at Marshall, and I did an internship, and I knocked out the equivalent of one class credit while doing that. And yes, technically I paid the university to do that, but I would have paid the university to sit in a classroom and write papers as well. So a couple other stipulations, there we go, put on the unpaid internship include the duration of the internship is limited, and both parties understand that the student is not entitled to a paid job at the end. So you don't even want to go into it with the guise that this is going to automatically turn into a full-time job. And I think in the past, maybe people have been led to believe that, and then it does not do that. So that could be a bad situation. So how to handle an unpaid internship, or the offer or the prospect of an unpaid internship. So this is kind of the meat right here that I want to get to. So my advice, if you have the opportunity or are at least considering an unpaid internship, here are some things to think about. Number one, do at least consider it. NACE surveys suggest internships help students get a full-time job more quickly than students who do not have an internship listed. Now, generally, I like NACE pretty well. They did do a survey, and they did kind of like a study where they talked about unpaid internships may not be as helpful as paid internships. But remember, you don't necessarily have to tell an employer that it was an unpaid internship. Now, I'm not saying to lie. If you're filling out an application and they ask you earnings, then I wouldn't make up a number, but I wouldn't necessarily go in for an interview and make a big point out of telling them it was unpaid either. I don't know that you necessarily need to disclose that. I think focusing on the skills you take away from it, or when you're selling that internship to a prospective employer, I think touching on those skills and really selling those skills is more important than how much monetarily you were compensated for the internship. So a word of caution, because now that I've mentioned NACE, if you go online and start doing some digging on this, you'll hear NACE also talk about that lower starting salaries, or they're corresponded with unpaid internships versus paid internships. And there's a bit of a correlation causation issue there, because some fields in the arts and journalism, just to name a couple fields like that, it's actually harder to get a paid internship. Oftentimes they're not fields that are known for their high earnings anyway. So the starting salaries correspondingly do tend to be lower as well. So just again, this is a classic. This is one of those classic logical fallacies. Just because something is correlated doesn't mean something causes something. So I have a hunch that plays into it a little bit as well. So number two, you want to think about how this unpaid internship is going to fit in with your other commitments. Now, if someone is offering you an internship and it's 40 hours a week and it's unpaid, that's a big chunk of time. That's something you do want to think about. But what if it's much fewer than 40 hours per week? What if it's a flexible schedule? If you do something like that, that starts to not sound so bad. Keep in mind, not all internships are going to ask 40 hours a week from you. So get the particulars on that, not just how many hours am I going to be working, but how flexible is this? Can this fit around my existing commitments? So you might even go as far as to actually ask for a flexible schedule. And something in my research preparing for today, something I did uncover is that unpaid internships, another upside of them is they do tend to be a little bit more flexible, just not as grueling as a paid internship. I think if an organization understands that they're paying you nothing, not to say there won't be expectations, but they may not drive you quite as hard as they would if you were a paid intern. So that can, depending upon how you look at it, that can also be a plus. And speaking of asking for other benefits, you don't want to overlook that other benefits or other types of compensation might exist for an unpaid internship. Now, just because they're not paying you an hourly rate or a stipend or something like that for doing it, it is possible that you might get an allowance for either clothing, maybe mileage, other types of stipends or reimbursement. They may be a possibility. I don't feel that, especially once an offer is leveraged, I don't know that it's necessarily a bad idea to ask about that. It doesn't mean that you'll get it. But there are other ways to somewhat compensate an intern, even if you can't actually be paid by the hour for completing the internship. So number four, that was number three, by the way. Number four is to consider what you'll take away other than money. Now, like I said, especially if this is going to be your bread and butter gig for a summer, you really do want to think about what it's paying you. But an unpaid internship can give you other takeaways that necessarily aren't financial, and this can include a network, a growing network in your field and professional contacts. Like we'd said a few minutes ago, perhaps a more relaxed environment, and not that I'm necessarily encouraging students just to seek out the path of least resistance or anything like that. But if you're in a situation where you're still learning, being in a more relaxed environment might not be a terrible thing. There can even be free trainings. During my research for today, I uncovered a few examples of that. An unpaid intern got to sit in on courses that were hundreds and perhaps even thousands of dollars for more seasoned employees, and they got to access that information for free. So, which I think is pretty neat. You can also continue to do some company and industry research. You can see if you would see yourself working in this type of job. And it kind of, I don't want to necessarily compare it to a job shadow, because I'm hoping by the time an internship's on the horizon, the student has already done some research. But then again, anything can look good on paper, even if you liked it during a job shadow. If you spend hours upon hours of doing it, you might either fall in love with it even more, or you might realize that it's not for you. So it can be a way to explore a little bit for free ready to kind of dip your toe in the pond before totally jumping in head first, so to say. And not only just the industry, but also the employer. You can tell, is this a type of employer that I would see myself working for? Would I ever want to return here full time? Do I want to leave here on my last day and never look back? You can also learn things, what to look for in an employer, what to avoid, what you want to stay away from in an employer. And the more you work, just the more any professional works, I think we get a clearer picture of that. But when you're new and starting out, it's easy, and I think rightfully so, to want to pounce on any job that comes your way. But even an unpaid internship, you can see, what do I like about here? What do I not like about here? What types of things do I want to seek out when it comes time for my first full-time opportunity? Again, you can also get firsthand job experience. Not to mention, I would say firsthand job experience in and of itself can be helpful, but if you do it right, if you happen to do an unpaid internship for maybe a more reputable organization, or you just get to go somewhere really neat, you can even add a little bit of wow factor to your resume. One of the articles I read in preparation for today, someone had talked about going to London, and they had a really cool opportunity in London, and yes, it was expensive, and it was a little bit of a challenge, I think, to pay for it at the time. But this person several years later said every time they interview for a job, it's always asked about, and it always piques the interest of those who are interviewing them. So you have to look at both sides of the coin on that. And then also you get organizational experience, and this can be kind of like what I just talked about, but something I think I've mentioned on podcasts before, something I've done in class presentations as well, is thinking about those NACE competencies. And I got an email today from NACE that they've done some updating, but this includes everything from like global and intercultural fluency to problem solving to communication skills, career management. These competencies that employers expect you to be proficient in, if you go and get organizational experience, you can start to shape those, and you can start to show your proficiency in those areas. And something I don't know, that as a individual, that as a department, as a university, something I don't know that we always do a great job of telling students is that if all you have is a degree, when you go to apply for a job, you're honestly not going to be that competitive of a candidate, because a lot of people have degrees. And even if you don't have other experiences to accompany that degree, you will be competing against people who do when you go to apply for jobs. So you want to be thinking about, in addition to that degree, what else can I add to my resume to be as competitive as possible? But also, don't forget, you might just walk away with a full-time job. I don't want to say the individual's name, but someone I'm very close to, that happened to them with actually a local employer here in Huntington. An unpaid internship turned into a part-time job, which turned into a full-time job. So things like that can happen. And also, something else to keep in mind about internships that kind of goes along with the more laid-back feel that I had talked about a few minutes ago. But internships are a place where it's okay to try and to fail. If you're an intern somewhere, if you're a student, you've got a little bit more leeway. People won't be as surprised when you fail, and not that people necessarily expect very little of you, or not that people expect you to necessarily do a terrible job. But when you're new, when you're starting out, there will be missteps in your career, and getting some kind of an internship is a great way to kind of work the bugs out, so to say. Things that could cost you a job later on in your career could just be almost a laughable learning experience as an intern. So I think anytime you can do a kind of like a practice run, if you will, that can be a good way to think about it. So just to wrap up here, obviously a paid internship is more ideal in many ways, not least of which is more dollars in your pocket. I would urge you, don't be so quick to dismiss the opportunity to do an unpaid internship, because there can be, as we just talked about at length, there can be a lot of good things you can take away from an unpaid internship. Of course, money is not going to be one of them. That being said, don't forget to advocate for yourself. Do take into account those stipulations put on unpaid internships by the Department of Labor. Don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. Don't let someone use and abuse you. Don't let someone exploit you for free labor or anything like that, because that is not what I want today's takeaway to be. That is not the type of opportunity I want you to seek. So don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. Make sure you're still getting something out of it, because an internship should still provide you with something, even if it's not, again, dollars in your pocket. But it also it also can be just a great opportunity to launch your career. And really, we all have to start somewhere, and an unpaid internship could be your start in the field. I think a very high number of students don't leave a university and walk right into their dream job. I mean, yes, it can happen. I wouldn't bank on it happening. And really, we all do have to start somewhere. We need that first big break. And I think I've talked about it on here before. My first big break in higher education, it was teaching a computer class, and that led to teaching more classes, which led to further promotion at this organization, and that set me up very nicely when I applied to Marshall going on 6 years ago. So and that, of course, was a part-time job. It wasn't an unpaid internship, but I'm happy. I was looking for full-time work at the time. I'm happy that I had made time for it in my schedule. And sidebar too, when I had applied for it, I didn't think I would be called back for it, but I was actually called that day, hired the next day, and was working within a week. So don't be afraid to pursue opportunities like that. At least see where they might go. So I want to thank everyone for joining us on OverHERD Career Education. Something I probably need to be plugging more is we have a great Instagram, and we also have a wonderful YouTube channel where this podcast will be posted. So definitely check out those items. That's a great way to stay more in touch with the Office of Career Education. It's my hope that you will do that. So thank you again for joining me, and I hope you'll join me next time.